Welcome to my nightmare.
I betrayed.net. The story is about my blog. I have a blog and I had an idea beyond this blog. I want to make it very similar to VS Code. Why? Because I write all my texts directly in VS Code. And it's not only about the code. In fact, I really don't like to use VS Code as an IDE. But I like to take notes, I like to write scripts, like scenarios for the videos, and I write articles in VS Code. And I like a lot how the Markdown looks inside the VS Code. And that's why I decided that my blog should look like this. When I decided to create a blog, it was a little more than a year ago, I spent some time thinking about what it should look like. The idea didn't come for a while, and when it finally did, I was surprised. It hadn't come sooner. If I write articles and scripts in VS Code, why not to let people read them in something like that? I tried to fork the repository and strip away unnecessary parts, but quickly realized that it would be fairly difficult. I tried deploying a full Visual Studio Code instance and disabling some extra features that I didn't want to use. It was pain also. This was already violating my core principle. Invest more in substance, not in a form. You can't spend months pushing a blog that only has one article. So I grabbed the base colors and a few styles from VS Code and shipped the first version to the users. In the first version, I made the articles look like markdown files inside the VS Code. I even copied these breadcrumbs, but the list of articles was not so good. But luckily, people started reading it. After working with ChatGPT a bit, I can't remember the exact version that it was at that time, I made a GitHub pipeline that look through the folders and take all the MD files and convert them into HTML, pushing the results to the neighboring folder, and did a bit of CSS extraction from VS Code, and voila! It looked almost identical, except for the syntax highlighting, which was handled in the Visual Studio Code by the complex system of language server protocols. So I used another library that works not so good as native VS Code, but it was simple and allows me to convert just some parts of codes that I used inside my articles into the HTML. So I had a folder full of HTML and needed to slap some interface on top. Enter Vue, which I was working with a lot at that time and actually liked. Maybe it was overkill, but I had already set up and spent less time than I would have with bare scripts without closing the door for future improvements. Maybe it was overkill, but I had already set up and I think it took less time than it would if I tried with bare scripts. I also wanted to track how many people read which article, or at least opened it. That requires backend, which meant GitHub pages went out. Or have they added something for this? I grabbed .NET with minimal APIs and EF cores. Overkill? I have gone with Node.js, Go, PHP. I don't think so. I can do almost anything with .NET. I know how to deploy it, and I have done it countless times in dozens ways. Plus, I ended up with a project of just 2 files, CSproj and program.cs, together fewer than 100 lines of code. And this is a full-featured project with an endpoint, object relational models, Swagger, database, and migration support, and the ability to scale it to bloody enterprise without even changing a stack. But why did I even need a database? Because I wanted to store not only the number of visits, but the time of each visit to visualize it in some way soon. To deploy it, I use a tiny DigitalOcean virtual machine with half a gigabyte of RAM, and I deployed everything even without Docker. Just a plain Linux service. Set up continuous delivery via GitHub CI with SSH in something like 20 minutes. I make a change in the article, write a new one, or tweak the frontend or backend. Everything lives in one repository. On the powerful, compared to my half gigabyte production, GitHub build agents, everything gets built and deployed in a single pipeline. Alongside each MD file, I created a JSON file with tag, stuffed with meta tag, planning eventually add server-side rendering for something like search engine optimization. That's basically it. I also hooked up with Google Analytics. I had some problems with it. Accessing the SQLite database was a pain. The site wasn't particularly fast, search engines weren't indexing it a lot, and there were no social media previews. I translated a few articles into English and figured out that implementing the multi-language support would also be tricky. So let's go to the version 2. While working on my DIY video streaming series, I got hands on Cloudflare, and wow, it was amazing. For small projects, they have become the minimalistic, aesthetic cloud provider with a clean and uncomplicated UI focused on gear distribution. I recently had to work on a small project with Azure, and it was hellish. To create one simple scene, I had to create another one, and then bin them in some different ways. And it was really frustrating and awful. And if you say that, what about AWS or GCP, they are in fact almost the same. Cloudflare has generous free tiers, and I was itching to cut my blog expenses for $48 per year. I juggle quite a few projects, and the ability to forget about them for years relies on not inflating costs. I used to pay for SSL certificates, but then I have found Certbot, a cool project from EEF. Every project used to run on a separate DigitalOcean virtual machine. But then I learned Docker and learned how to pack almost all of them on $5 virtual machine. I used to have a separate CI/CD, but then GitHub rolled out their actions, and I gradually moved almost everything there with no extra machines needed. All of this let me keeping my projects running for years, even if my income drops sharply, without shutting anything down, which is quite important for me. Better yet, each of these tricks give me cheap experience I could later monetize in job interviews, consulting or mentoring. For video streaming, I used R2 storage. It is an S3 compatible blob storage. It worked quickly and without issues. Adding a custom domain gave me a CDN with unlimited, not paid reads for static content. I'm not sure what their free limits are, but I uploaded tens of gigabytes, deleted everything, re-uploaded, and paid nothing. Reads aren't mattered at all. Around the same time, I worked with Workers KV, persistent key-value storage in the Cloudflare cloud. It spun up and ran fast. I orchestrated everything with Workers, Cloudflare's backend solution that might seem similar to AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, but had enough differences, so you shouldn't be fooled. They have hard limits, 10 milliseconds of CPU time per request, but it is specially CPU time, not request time. You can fetch data from a remote server for half an hour. That's an I/O operation, and it is not metered. They got their own runtime for native JavaScript support, and Rust and Python, and even some other languages with WebAssembly. I could compile my .NET backend inside WebAssembly and try to work with it inside their cloud, but probably some next time. Maybe later it would be another experiment. On top of all of this, they offered even an SQL database, and it is even replicated worldwide. It is D1SQL. It is a database built on SQLite and replicated globally. Writes happen on the primary zone, and reads can happen from the nearest replica, and they have this eventual consistency. Since SQLite has been stuffed into browsers, iOS and Android, it is the world's most popular database. But as a web developer, you can spend your whole life without even working with it. SQLite has some classic issues, especially with Cyrillic languages. Since this database is essentially a distributed system, don't expect 100% consistency at every moment of time. You'll get there at some point of time later. So let's put it all together. Articles. They are still in markdown files, but I moved them to a separate repository. I added a GitHub pipeline which built them and pushed to a Cloudflare R2 storage. Besides, not only HTML goes there, but all other assets that I am using inside my articles go there too. I moved from JSON to YAML to describe tags and added some features not to type the similar text for different articles lots of times. But I compile all these YAML files inside one JSON, which also put to R2 storage. I use Cloudflare pages for frontend. I was tempted to try something newer than Vue, but I decided that that's enough new in this experiment already. After pestering GitHub Copilot agent a bit, I created a new site design, nice and without unnecessary complexity. I even didn't write any code manually. I barely wrote not much of code myself. I mostly created GitHub issues and assigned them to a Copilot. Then I received PRs, reviewed them, and I could do 3-4 tasks without even opening a code editor. I used Opus as the model and the results were surprisingly good. For backend, I used a Cloudflare worker. Right now it's a single endpoint for tracking article reads. The file describing all articles are served statically and lived on a CDN. So altogether, 2 repositories, one for the articles and another for the code. A pipeline that pushes everything to the storage, and front-end and back-end code, and one more pipeline that deploys all this. I faced one issue when I moved to the Cloudflare CDN. I clicked import records and only 10 records were imported. So 1 or 2 of my side projects fall down because the records for them were missed. They were on some of my subdomains. And they also disappeared from Namecheap admin panel because I switched it to Cloudflare admin panel, so I had to spend some time finding their IP addresses and trying to remember the configuration. But what about advantages? I cut costs, gained experience that I can monetize later, and the site becomes significantly faster. And will stay that even under the heavy load. It finally looks closer to the idea that I had at the beginning. And I achieved this result almost without even writing any code. It's almost all tasks were completed with AI. And in fact, it was genuinely interesting. For once, I was bored while poking around in a big clouds interface or CLI. Wrangler CLI, a Cloudflare CLI tool for integrating with the API, just works good. AI easily writes command and they actually work, and I can quickly find what I need in the web interface of the cloud. I had the similar experience only on DigitalOcean. Neither Azure nor GCP nor AWS gave such experience on simple projects to me. So, what to add? I am planning to add comments, and I want to make them look like pull request comments that can be attached to any part of the article, and they will be shown close to this part. I want to implement server-side rendering and proper search engine optimization to make people know about my site, and also to make it possible to show some preview when you post the link to my website in some social media. And probably it would be not for this blog, but for some other project. I want to try to combine Cloudflare workers with .NET inside WebAssembly and to run it on their edge nodes. And the coolness of all this that the Cloudflare backend is actually deployed to their edge nodes in the different regions. And when you are sending request, even to the backend, the closed server will serve it. So the conclusions. I got a blog that actually looks like it was originally wanted and runs much faster. I gained some experience with full-featured project on Cloudflare. I saved like $50 a year, and I have a separate repository for articles, which is in fact more convenient for me. Thanks for watching.
Nightmare. I think you're gonna like it.